So welcome to this Facebook Live. Today what I'm going to talk about is this concept of symptoms, energy and brain training. What is brain training and neuroplasticity? Why you have more influence on your energy than you realise, and why the mind and brain are important in relation to energy and symptoms. So I've made a video where I talk more about neuroplasticity, and I've put the link below this video. So why is it important to talk about this topic? Well, we know that stress switches off the parasympathetic nervous system, and when that happens, that puts the brakes on our body's attempts to heal. So that's not going to help our symptoms subside, okay? And it also affects energy production. The body stops producing energy in the form of long-chain fatty acids. So in normal circumstances, when we're in the parasympathetic state, the body produces those long-chain fatty acids, in particular the liver and the large muscles, and they get stored in the liver and the large muscles. Okay, so already you now have an understanding of why, what's happening in the body and brain can be affecting energy. Okay, now stress can be from the mind, and therefore the energy or our energy can be affected by what's going on in our mind. So a really important concept that I want to share is that you are already brilliant at brain training. Okay, so let's talk about what brain training is. Anytime we use our mind to reinforce a particular response or choice, this causes changes in the brain. Okay, this is called neuroplasticity. Okay, the ability of the mind to change the brain with use. Okay, and those changes in the brain are number one chemical, number two structural, and number three functional. Example of a chemical change is, for example, let's say you meditate for a minute, but then at the end of that minute you feel really disappointed because you say to yourself, it was only for a minute, that's a bit lame. Then you're going to produce stress chemicals, okay, in your brain. That's going to affect the way the brain works. Alternately, if you meditate for 1 minute and celebrate, say that's great, that's amazing, if I do this every day for a minute, that for a month, that'll be a real achievement, and once I've done it for a minute for a month, I can probably do it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and I can build a practice. Okay, so if we celebrate just do that meditation for 1 minute, then we produce chemicals in the brain that actually make us feel good, including dopamine. Example of structural change is if we use a particular pathway in the brain and we send a signal down that neuron and it goes in this direction, and let's say, for example, this is an unhelpful response, okay? If we keep doing that, then the wiring is going to get thicker, and therefore the signal is going to travel more quickly along that neuron, and it's going to jump this gap here and travel down that neuron. And we're going to experience, let's say, anxiety or sadness or whatever. So that practicing that behavior is causing a structural change. Okay, if we decide actually that's not very useful, let's start going down this pathway. In the example I've just given, I've decided to meditate for a minute and I'm going to celebrate that, and so I'm going to generate good feelings. Then the signal starts travelling down this pathway and it stops going down this pathway. Okay, and this pathway can shrink. So now we've got a functional change in the brain. The brain is functioning differently. Instead of going down this pathway, it's going down this one. Okay, so that's a functional change. Okay, so as I say, anytime we're using the mind, we're changing the brain. Okay, so people talk about brain training, but actually I think we should call it mind training, because we train the mind and that changes the brain. It's a bit like if you're driving along in the car, you decide which road to go down, okay, whether to go down the motorway or the A road, okay. So in the same way, the mind is like the driver of the car. It's making decisions, it's making choices, okay, and the choices we make have a consequence for the way the brain is wired. So as I say, a key point I want you to consider is that you're already brilliant at brain training, okay. So let's talk a bit about neuroplasticity then. Neuroplasticity, as I've said, is the ability of the brain to change with use. Okay, the mind is affecting the brain. The brain is making about 1 million connections every second. Okay, and what's interesting is that we can influence some of those connections. And we can influence those connections in helpful ways. For example, let's imagine someone's working in a bar and one day the electric till breaks down. Now they have to do the maths in their head. What are they going to be like at doing maths in their head to begin with? Okay, pop your thoughts in the chat. You know, how is someone going to be the first time they have to do the maths in their head? Let's say the numbers are quite easy. Pint of beer is £5.50, a glass of wine is £6, packet of crisps is £1.50. So initially they might have to think about it, but actually after a while, as they practice it, they're going to get better at it. And after they've done it for one night, they're going to be much better than they were at the beginning of the night. In a week's time, they're going to be even better, okay? Even if the numbers are a bit more complicated. So there's loads of things that you're really good at that are useful. Okay, what's some examples of that? Might be that you learned an instrument, maybe you're really good at setting boundaries, you're really good at being focused on one thing at a time. That's something I've really had to work at because, you know, my tendency in the past was to get distracted really easily. So when I'm working on a project, I have to turn off my phone and turn off my mail in order to stay focused. Might be that you're really good at seeing the funny side of things or not taking things personally if someone, you know, behaves in, you know, not very kind ways. Again, some of us are very, you know, have had the experience of being super sensitive to the behaviour of others. And again, that's something I've had to really work at to learn how to not be affected so much by the behaviour or opinions of others. Okay. I also like to consider what are some ways that you've become really good at something, but they're not actually very helpful. Okay. So it might be, for instance, I was reading a paper written by Martin Seligman, who is one of the founders of positive psychology. And in this paper, he was talking about the fact that lawyers have a tendency towards pessimism, and that's really useful in their job. But for some people, not for everybody, it can actually filter into their life, and that's not very useful. Some people are really good at generating low self-esteem or catastrophizing or anxiety. That was something I was really good at before I had ME/CFS. And actually, so when I had ME/CFS, I was still good at it. And as I say, it's causing changes in the brain, which are chemical, structural, functional. We know from research that someone who's good at generating anxiety, there's physical changes in the brain. The neurons in the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that scans the environment for threats, gets overdeveloped, and that can be problematic and actually means we get good at generating anxiety. And certainly I was really good at generating anxiety when I had ME. And as we've talked about already, that meant that I was just switching on the stress response, which was hindering my body's attempts to heal. It was hindering the production and storage of energy. So let's just kind of look at an example. Let's imagine you've got a sensation. That sensation, or let's say it could be a symptom, can be physical sensation, or you might be experiencing emotion. You notice some fatigue in your body or some tension, and you have an emotional response. You feel upset, you feel frustrated. Now, what might happen is you start generating some thoughts of, oh no, how long will this last? Will I ever get better? Now, that's going to result in feelings of anxiety, okay? So, and as we know, that's going to deplete our energy. It's going to exacerbate our symptoms. What happens is we notice that sensation, we have a thought, that results in anxiety, and that amplifies the sensation. If we keep doing that, we're just going into a not very helpful spiral. Okay. The author of a book called Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, said that the untrained mind goes to the negative. Okay. So the bad news, as we've just talked about, is that we can get good at things that are unhelpful. So if we practice anxiety, we get good at it, and wiring our body for more anxiety, more stress. It might mean that we can get really good at being impatient, resisting what is happening, being self-critical if we overdo it, and experiencing a lot of anxiety and fear, catastrophizing, etc. The good news is that we have the power of choice. We have the ability to be conscious of what we're doing, okay? And when we exercise that choice in a useful way, we're training the mind and changing the brain in useful ways, okay? So, for example, we can train our mind to get good at identifying those unhelpful responses, interrupting those unhelpful responses and creating new responses. How? Well, there's many ways of doing that. One way is to reframe the situation, to ask this question: how can I look at this situation in a different way? How could it help me grow? So, for example, if you are experiencing symptoms, you could ask yourself that question, what is my default response when I experience symptoms? I know for me, it would be really easy to catastrophize. I kind of forget that I would come out of the dip that I was in or the crash. And in that moment, I'd forget that, okay? So I have to remind myself, actually, I will come out of this. How can I look at this situation differently? How could it help me grow? Well, actually, it could help me grow if I choose to start responding in a different way. One of the things I've talked about in one of the other videos is creating a personal handbook where you write down strategies that have worked. So, for example, if you deal with a dip in a resourceful way, write it down so that when you're in the dip next time, you can refer to it. Because I can remember a time when that's what happened. I responded to kind of flu symptoms in a really useful way, and these flu symptoms that in the past would have lasted a week or two literally passed in a few hours. But the next time that happened, I couldn't remember what I'd done because I hadn't written it down. Okay, so after that I started writing things down. Okay, so we can get good at spotting both the unhelpful patterns and the helpful patterns. And we can get good at interrupting the unhelpful patterns and reinforcing the helpful ones. So instead of constantly generating impatience if we overdo it and have a dip, we can learn to be patient. Instead of resisting, we can learn acceptance. Instead of being self-critical, we can learn compassion. And instead of fear, we can learn trust. So you can remember that by the initials PACT, okay? Patience, acceptance, compassion, trust, okay? So, and the other thing that's useful to ask ourselves right now, am I kind of adopting fixed mindset, thinking I can't change, I'm stuck, I'm never going to get well? Or am I embracing growth mindset thinking? Okay, I'm in a bit of a dip, but I can learn from this, I can grow, I can develop new habits and patterns that are going to help me move forward. I will talk about, in the next video, I'll talk about what I mentioned in this slide, which is about how we respond to sensations, how we respond to emotions. As I say, the typical habit can be that we go to our mind and create lots of thought. And actually we can learn to be with our emotions and to be with the physical sensations without creating lots of thoughts that actually just activates more stress. Okay, and then in a future video I'll talk more about the implications of neuroplasticity when it comes to dealing with pain. So if you've got any questions, put a comment in the chat. If you're watching the replay, just pop replay in the chat so I know. And as I mentioned, I will be doing a pacing challenge next week. If you'd like to know more about that, just put the word pacing in the chat and I will PM you the details. So thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, get in touch. But for now, I'll say bye for now.